All right, ladies and gentlemen, we take you over to the fireside chat, and the topic is Building Leaders of Tomorrow. We're just taking a minute to do the setup. We've got a team which is really working very hard and very fast, as you can see, and they're really doing it at lightning speed. And our speakers for this session, this fireside chat, which is very interesting, Building Leaders of Tomorrow, which I'm very interested in as well, to create fearless, focused future leaders is my wish and my intention. That is what I'm on a mission to do. So for the speakers, we will have Mr. Sunil Gupta, co-founder and CEO of Neotia Infrastructure, and Mr. Harshvardhan, Neotia Chairman, Ambuja Group, who will be in conversation with Mr. Jaydeep DuttaGupta, Senior Director, Deloitte. And in a short while, we're going to invite them onto the stage. Please put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen, for Mr. Sunil Gupta, co-founder and CEO of Neotia Infrastructure, Mr. Harshvardhan, Neotia Chairman, Ambuja Group. Please come on stage, and they will be in a very intense conversation with Mr. Jaydeep DuttaGupta. Warm welcome to you, gentlemen. Good afternoon, and this is going to be a very interesting session. Yes, a round of applause. It feels good to be applauding for stalwarts of the industry such as these wonderful gentlemen that we have. And I hand over the session to Mr. Jaydeep DuttaGupta, Senior Director of Deloitte, to take it forward. Sir.
Thank you, ma'am. I was wondering, this is a hard act to follow. You have us up here after a stand-up comedian. But there's a pro and there's a con of that. The advantage of that is this audience has already been trained to clap and cheer, right? So we don't have to worry too much, right? Now we have a very interesting subject this afternoon, which is developing the leaders for tomorrow. It's not developing leaders for today, but it's developing leaders for tomorrow. How do you go about it? Right. And we have two very accomplished leaders here with us today. So we'd like to pick your brain on this subject. This is designed as a fireside chat. So I'm sorry, audience, there are no PowerPoint presentations. There is nothing prepared, nothing scripted. It's going to flow. Okay. So the first thought in my mind when looking at the subject is, if we are talking about developing leaders for tomorrow, then we have to have some sense of what is tomorrow, which would possibly be vastly different from today. In fact, in my personal life, I find myself rather ill-equipped to try and guide my sons because they know so much more than me on so many things. They are so well-informed and they have different perspectives. So I think the first difference will be in the workforce of tomorrow, the millennials. What is it that is different about millennials? What is different about their aspirations and what they are looking for? So we'll start off with Mr. Neotia.
Thank you very much. Greatly honored to be part of INFOCOM's panel today. Well, see, there are some things that remain constant and there are some things that change with time. With time, we see that the kind of infrastructure, the knowledge, the availability of information, all this is much vastly different than the time we grew up in when there was no World Wide Web and there was no mobile phones and there was no digital economy. So we had limitations. We had to actually go physically to a library to maybe check out some things, and now it's all available at a click, even sometimes at a command away, literally. So those things, I think this generation is far better equipped. In fact, they don't even want to memorize things anymore because it's just not necessary. I mean, it's just available. I think where we have a role to play possibly is about character building. I mean, and that kind of remains constant through generations. Because irrespective of what is the nature of the world and the nature of the knowledge, character is something that will be everlasting and probably through millennia and through generations. And people's ability to succeed will largely depend not just on access to information or knowledge, but in how they utilize that. And for that, the way they are endowed with compassion, with a sense of fair play, with integrity, are the issues, to my mind, where we need to build leadership in. Because even the most, the most telling example is that we have the finest technology available, but they can be used as much for destruction as for generation of power. It's a question of what is the moral compass of the world, and how the morality of the leaders of tomorrow will determine the knowledge is used. Otherwise, you can use the same mind. In our mythology, it is well known that Ravan's intellect, the fact that he is portrayed as 10 heads, is not a physical deformity of 10 physical heads. It just is to indicate that how truly brainy and truly intellectual he was. But since he was not having a very high moral compass, it is where Ram scores over Ravan, because that's where Maryada Purushottam Ram and the character that he sort of portrays and lives by. So I think for us, it's really in our role as seniors to our children maybe, is to really try and see how we can inculcate this.
Right. And we'll move in a moment to how do you do that in your organization. But I think what is emerging from what you said is that the millennial generation perhaps is a lot more conscious about ethics, integrity, doing the right thing, even issues such as the planet, right? Environment, conscious about the environment, okay? And whilst I am not suggesting that there's anything wrong with our generation, but I think the level of consciousness on these issues is much higher. Would you tend to agree?
Absolutely. Sorry. Yes, absolutely. No doubt about it. I think the consciousness on many of these fronts are much higher today than they were in our generation. In fact, our generation was in a shortage era where there was license permit quota. We were a Jugadu generation in that sense. I mean, today's generation doesn't need to kind of cut corners. But that's not to say that we have actually landed up in a world which is more ethical. We have a world which is equally complicated, perhaps more than before, in spite of the fact that the generation is more sensitive. So there is a dichotomy of sorts. I am not sure how this is to be addressed, but the fact remains that we have moral challenges significantly available even today.
Okay. But then this generation possibly is putting a lot more pressure on their leadership to do the right thing than any earlier generation. Possibly. I'll move to a different dimension of tomorrow. Okay. I don't know in how many years, but maybe 5 years or 10 years from today, possibly artificial intelligence, machines will become smarter than people. True. Right? So, can you paint for us from your deep, background in technology, how different will tomorrow be in a technological sense? Okay. So, can you share your thoughts on that?
Very difficult to predict, frankly speaking, considering the pace which technology is, I would say, driving in our lives, where earlier if we were saying that it will take 3 years or 6 years or 10 years for some generational changes to come in, today the generational changes are coming in, I think, every 3 months or 6 months. I think most of us don't realize that just 20 years back, internet was not there in our lives, right? Just about 3 years back, we were not paying through UPIs and Paytms and GPays and PhonePays of the world. But today we are using these things as if we were using them for generations. So, I think AI of today is very different from the AI what we used to learn when we were engineering colleges, right? Today's AI is practically, so in engineering typically we say there is an input, you put a processing machine and there's an output, right? And you have to teach the computer what is the processing so that it generates the desired output. The today's version of AI is you are giving input to the machine, you are giving output to the machine, and the machine will figure out itself what is the processing logic behind that. You give so much of information to the machine, so much information to the machine. You teach the machine so much of samples, and you tell which sample is right or wrong. And then the machine will start learning, and for all future samples which you give to the machine, it will exactly, accurately predict what is right or wrong. The reason I'm explaining this, the moment you apply this type of AI, not only the structured workflow processes which we thought can always be automated, it is even those softer issues, the human issues, the job of a nurse, job of a painter, job of a writer, job of a movie director, even those things are doable nowadays, and we have samples and examples of that worldwide, which AI is doing. So my own personal prediction, based on what I can see, based on interaction with lots of people and hearing about what is happening, is the world of future will be where machines will be able to do practically everything, even those things which we are a little fearful to admit that machines will not be doing. So machines will be able to do that. The bigger challenge, I'm just putting it for our new generation, because they are the ones who will be actually be contributor to making of these machines of future, would be how do we bring in the element of ethics in this machine? Because even when these machines are becoming intelligent, they are becoming intelligent by way of when some inputs are going, you're telling the machine what input was right or what is wrong. It is like there are examples being quoted in AI world that if the input is that so-and-so person did it, and that person happened to be a black in American culture, you will tend to recognize that with a criminal, and the person was white, possibly you tend to recognize that as not criminal. The same thing can be applied in Indian system as well, where the personal biases of the person who actually was feeding in the input and then was trying to tell the machine right or wrong can come in. How we ensure that the millennial generation, which will become leaders of tomorrow, will be making these engines, that the AI of tomorrow not only makes our life simple, productive, for things to be easy to use the way they are making it today, but the machines are also ethical, so that our culture, our especially in the context of India, you cannot bring an AI engine of a US or a Europe and bring it and try to apply it to India, because our cultural context is very, very different. So I think that will be a very big responsibility for the next million generation, where today AI may be just some pilot concepts, but tomorrow's AI will be very, very mature, which will practically influence almost every facet of our life.
So when we talk about the future leader, therefore the future leader will be leading in a very different construct, where machines do almost everything.
Yeah.
So they have to figure out now how can the human beings, make best use of those machines to serve their stakeholders. Right.
Absolutely, and I think what Sir was saying was exactly, and what I have said is exactly converging, because what Sir said, that the current generation has got the benefit of being exposed to everything, right? Thanks to, internet, thanks to social media, thanks to, every single information is on their tips. There's no lack in their lives, thanks to maybe the overall economic growth which our generation is able to give to the next generation. The next generation does not have to literally look for a living when they come on our age, right? And they're exposed to all these technologies also. So here the issue is not to find a job. Here the issue is, I already have possibly some security. I already have the knowledge and the intelligence. I already know what technologies are available. But I apply this, the cultural part, which Sir was talking about, that how do we bring that element? That is what I would say will be the real leadership for tomorrow.
So then can we conclude that the future leader and organizations will be more focused on doing good for communities, doing good for people, right? Doing good for the planet, as opposed to the arduous task of how to make a profit, how to, so will well-being of the larger community and that the business operates in, sustainability of the organization as well as the planet, the community, the organization, these will be the purposes of the future, moving away from the purpose of a pure profit motive, and will the world become less money-centric and more sustainable-centric?
No, I think that would be very utopian to imagine. I can't see that happening, though that would be ideally a desirable outcome of what we would like. I think the key issue stems from the fact, and it comes from a very beautiful quote that Mahatma Gandhi made, that there is enough in this world for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. I think one of the reasons why we have many issues with climate change and others in the world is simply because we are exploiting far too much than we are replenishing. And so long this continues, we are going to have an adverse cycle. I don't see that the younger generation, or for that matter our generation, has any way diminished our wants and our so-called greed, which has become almost need today, because there is a very thin line that divides between what you need and what is more than what you need. And who's going to define that? So it keeps sort of getting stretched. And everyone knows that when you reach a stage, you say, okay, if I get there, that's pretty much fine. And then when you get there, you say, this is not fine, and something else, and something else. So I think we've also seen a very unfortunate thing happening, and particularly exaggerated during the COVID crisis, is that the income divide between the haves and the have-nots have much widened, much beyond reasonable. It's thanks to part of the welfarism of state governments and central government that there has been a semblance of some kind of stability provided to the lower end of society. But otherwise, that is a ticking time bomb, in my opinion, where this huge difference is not sustainable. It's not to say that people are born unequal and the fact that there will be some rich and some not rich and everything is fine, so long as that divide doesn't become so glaringly obvious and so glaringly so much so that there's somebody who's hardly able to survive and someone has just got a lot more than he can possibly do with. So I think there is some reset to happen in all this to let the world become sustainable. The catch in this is that the moment you start resetting this, actually the economy actually starts shrinking. Yeah. Because the economy cannot grow at the rate at which it grows and have consumption dropping. So then what happens? There is a cost of that fall. So the only way is that you need a philosopher to really figure out how we are going to reset the world which has got a better equilibrium. One of the reasons I feel, and I'm saying a slightly controversial point, that we measure success in very monetary terms. Yeah. We measure success in very financial terms, in very terms of achievement that says, okay, whether your name was published in the newspaper, whether you're famous, etc. But we don't look at the happiness as a very important index. And I happened to study the model of the gross national happiness of Bhutan. And I came back pretty impressed. And I thought that, there is some way, which may not be easy to measure, but clearly is a more defining and more important attribute of human existence. We want to be happy. Even if you can have less and be happy, it's more important than having more and unhappy. And how do we find that equation? I think the world can be happier with less than by a continuous chase to the more. As a businessman, I'll be pillared for saying this because we are driven on this adrenaline of growth and development, etc., etc. But somewhere I question myself as a human being and say, are we really on the right path?
You've raised a couple of very interesting issues. One is the divide between the haves and the have-nots, which could potentially lead to social tensions going forward. So that's going to be the world of the future, where possibly a reset at some stage would be called for sustainability. Second, of course, we talked about the planet. Now, all of this, and if you look at the geopolitics of late, in the last 5 years, has the world been a lot more volatile than it has been in any 5 years as far back as we can remember?
So if we look at it statistically, we're living in the most peaceful of times, statistically. I mean, the death or destruction out of hostile acts of war, etc., have been very low. But if you see the palpable tension beneath the surface, it's been probably very high. Now, it hasn't manifested in a cataclysmic Holocaust-like or an explosion of an atom bomb-like event. But that possibility is there, is very near. Hopefully, and God willing, it won't happen, and that's what we can pray for. But we have definitely caused many geopolitical stresses, tensions, fault lines, which are bothersome. Which day, which one is going to give way and create one huge ripple? And these ripples are not going to be small anymore. We know the capability of mass destruction that lies strewn across the world. And if there is a fault line that gets exasperated or exaggerated, it can cause immense havoc. We know that. The point is that where it's stemming from, this continuous need to be powerful, rich, and therefore does it serve a purpose for humanity? It could serve some sectarian ends of some individuals or some people, but in a larger context, where do we draw the line? What is enough? When is it enough to say enough is enough? I mean, this is a really moot question. It's not easy answers, I think, and certainly I don't have the answers. If I had them, I'd probably be playing a more important role than I do presently. But I don't have the answers, but I definitely am worried about this, and I definitely think about them.
So, therefore, the world is going to be a lot more volatile. We've already seen disruption of supply chains as a result of all this. We've seen cataclysmic, climate issues come up, health issues come up, right? So it's going to be a much more complex, volatile world in which the new leader will have to function. And I'd like to throw in another element in this discussion. In 1970 was the first time that the value of a company was more than the value of its net physical assets. Mm-hmm. Therefore, intangibles became more valuable than tangibles. Today, intangibles, if you look at the value of a lot of companies, the value of the intangibles is 85%.
Yes.
And the value of the tangibles is only 15%.
Yeah.
Now, intangibles are fundamentally created by people. So, from a capital-centric construct, the future will be more of a people-centric construct, because people are creative, people hold relationships, right? People have knowledge, right? So, more of a people-centric construct. So, then the leader of the future would need to be a people leader, yes or no?
Absolutely. I mean, as a leader, obviously, you end up playing lots of roles. You play the role of a strategy maker who visualizes the today's business and, more importantly, the future's business. That is the business part. You play the role of an operator when you go into micro details and make sure that the company functions the way it should function. And there can be many more facets of that role just to make sure that the business is, running today and tomorrow. But given the context which you said, and I think this is applicable for many years, with the service economy setting in much more than the manufacturing and the other economies, the people element has become the most important element, especially, and then nothing can be much more applicable than on the industry which I belong to, with the IT industry. And I think this topic is quite related, what you were talking about. Today, whether we talk about the sentiments and emotions of a senior most executive in the company, or whether I see the youngest person, let's say a fresh graduate just joining me, the aspiration levels, the sense of finding a purpose besides just getting money is, I think, assured, right, even at the entry level itself, is almost equal. The youngster also wants to find a purpose in life. And when you are trying to handle this type of a mix where people no more are too much worried about hierarchies, people want to do a job, they want to earn good money, but they also want to see whether this job is making an impact, not only to my nearby colleagues or my companies, but maybe beyond, what my company is making an impact to the end. It is not just about paying them a CTC. It's not just about making a very nice workplace in the organization. It's actually about also giving them a picture that your company is doing a valuable work, which means, which is serving some end purpose of the society. So instead of what we used to say, that instead of telling today's employees that what you need to do, how you need to do, most of the time we want to tell them why we are doing what we are asking you to do. The moment we give them the answer of why, it means they know that there is a much bigger purpose which possibly they were not knowing when the micro part of the work was given to them. The moment you connect them to that what part, possibly they will say, yes, this is something, and then they start finding purpose on that. So that is one part. Second, what I clearly see as a part of the leader's role is you always get functional experts in the company. You will have like 20, 30 different functions, departments, owners, and they all will be experts in their own respective function, whether it is the operations or productions or finance or HR or sales, whatever the function is, right? And they all will be doing their job very beautifully. Your role as a leader actually is not to do their job. Possibly they will always know better more than you. Is actually always to connect the dots, right? Either there are, some difference of opinion, right? Or there are, certain things which need to be brainstormed, and you just connect those dots. Again, what you are doing is, and this is what I find it in almost day to day in my own running of the organizations, is that most of the time, 90% of the time, the issues which actually end up coming to me were always people issues and were actually not genuine technical or any other organization issues. So if you ensure that the people are, number one, finding purpose in their life, number two, you are able to just give them that enabling environment so that they can do what they want to do, essentially focusing your own role as a leader to just managing people, keeping them happy. If you have kept the people happy in true sense, as Sir said, that they are able to find their purpose, they will keep your customers and your partners happy by default.
I think one very important point that Mr. Neotia made was compassion.
Yeah.
You cannot be a people leader without compassion.
Exactly.
So therefore you need compassion. Now I'll come to the key question, and I'll ask each of you to take 2 minutes to respond to this. So we are talking about a world which is going to be very volatile, where the workforce will be having very different aspirations. They don't want money only. They want to make sure that you have a sense of purpose, where you're doing good for society. Okay. Technology will become such that machines will do most of what human beings do today. So that's the kind of world, and a people-centric world. So we need to develop leaders to lead in that world. Now, are leaders born or made? If you say no, they can be made, leaders are made, then what competencies and how are you going to develop those competencies? What is the culture in your organization to develop leaders so that they have those competencies to lead in that future world? So this is my last question to both of you.
See, leaders are both born and made, and it's a combination. So there is a certain genetic disposition, maybe a trait that you have sort of inherited or you have imbibed more seamlessly, I would say, which is definitely an important attribute of leadership. But then there is a skill also, and that skill has to be acquired through a process of training, learning, imbibing, experiencing, etc. And I think it's a combination of the two. Nobody can say that a person who could be a leader purely intuitively and be very successful at the final level, and someone can't say that he had no capability whatsoever and was transformed into a great leader without intuitively having some sense of it. So I think that's...
So how would you develop a leader? Assuming that somebody has the inherent basic material, what is the organizational culture required to develop a leader?
So I think
or
there
leaders,
are, again, two parts of it. I feel, and as Swami Vivekananda said, it's about man-making. I mean, I wouldn't give too much of emphasis on leadership to skills. You can hire skills, you may be skilled. Most likely a person will be skilled in one of those activities, but he would lead a team of people with multidisciplinary skills, and that would be the nature of most leadership. So to assume that any of the leaders of our nation were people who are skilled in the multiple tasks that is required to run a country would be difficult to imagine. They might be extremely skilled in one aspect of it, but the others, they have to essentially have the ability to deal with people, inspire them, make them feel that they are working on a mission that is exciting, worthwhile, that through it they will get self-actualization as well as reward. And it's a combination of this that will work. So I would give less importance to skill development. I'd give more importance to man-making, therefore character, therefore compassion, therefore integrity. All those things that I enumerated in my opening comments would essentially be the attributes of great leadership.
Mr. Gupta.
Almost on similar lines. So yes, functional skills, depending on which function they are doing, they will bring something on their own, whether they're coming from college or whether we are hiring them laterally. They will bring some skills, and again, in today's days and age, there's no limit to how much functional skills you have to learn, relearn, and also some learning of the previous skills. So there's no alternative to continuous training, continuous investments from trainings and exposures, whether internal or external, which has to happen on the job as well as otherwise in a classroom way. So that has to go in. You know, there's no alternative to that, especially again in the changing world, especially on a sector like in which we are in. But yes, again, I would also like to emphasize on the same thing that if we have to develop the leaders of tomorrow, and I can right now visualize so much of youngsters who have just joined me in the last 2 years in my organization. One thing which I think our corporate culture sometimes make it very toxic, I would say, is too much emphasis on 100% perfection and non-acceptance of anything which is less than perfection. I'm not talking about the end results, which the company talking about. I'm talking about in day-to-day operations, expecting a person to be 100% and may not be 80%, assuming the person is a robot and he cannot make mistakes. That is where people then get scared if you try to make the meetings toxic. You tell the people you are of no good value if you have done a mistake. Essentially, if you will try one time or two times, the third time he'll stop trying. And after 6 months, we'll tag somebody as a failure and we'll ask him to go and we'll hire a new person, assuming that he will be 100% perfect. So, according to me, and that is what we had done, the only vision and operating value of my company is actually happiness. If you see our vision, is run the company as if you are running your family. What do? In our family, if my child make a mistake, will I say, okay, no, you go to the family? No, right? You do it, do a little bit of nurturing, then leave it to them. They will do something, they will come with 80% correct thing, again do a little bit of nurturing, and then they go. If you allow them 3 times make the mistake, 4th time they'll be 100% perfect, and then they will excel it better than what you were doing. So overall acceptance, overall a cordial atmosphere in the company, mutual respect, mutual trust, and accepting each other. Even if we are 70%, even a CEO of a company can never be 100%. He will have his own limitations. So if we can have a culture of acceptance, by default, it will lead to a huge culture of experimentation and risk-taking, which in our corporate jargon, we keep on asking and, asking our employees that you should be risk-taker and all. That will come only when you have a culture of trust-taking, a culture of acceptance, even if you have made a mistake. So if we do that, I think 100% people will be more and more encouraged. Trust them. The moment you trust them, they will end up doing much more than what we were expecting. Believe me, in my company, there are 1 year, just 1 year young in my company right from college. They are doing the job of what a 15-year-old person will be doing in the company, right? And they are doing it so much of responsibility that we just can't imagine. So just give them trust, just give them acceptance.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very positive note to end this discussion on. That build confidence of everyone in your organization, make people stronger. Only then will they become leaders. And you cannot make people stronger if you're always at them saying, do better. Thank you very much, Mr. Sunil Gupta. Thank you very much, Mr. Harshvardhan Neotia.
Thank you very much, sirs. May I request Mr. Dhruva Mukherjee, CEO of ABP Private Limited, to kindly come forward and present mementos to our speakers and our moderator here. May I request Mr. Dhruva Mukherjee to present a memento to Mr. Sunil Gupta. Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Harshvardhan Neotia and Mr. Jaydeep DuttaGupta. Sir, if you can, all of you can step forward for a photograph. They're all waiting for a photograph. Thank you very much, sirs, for this wonderful session on building leaders of tomorrow.